Howdy, let's move on to part 2 of chapter 10. So corporate governance is the set of mechanisms or tools used to manage agency relationships or relationships among stakeholders and to determine and control the strategic direction and performance of organizations. It is concerned with identifying ways to ensure that strategic decisions are made more effectively and is used in corporations to establish harmony between the firm's owners, its principals, and its top-level managers, the agents, whose interests may be in conflict. This brings us to agency costs and governance mechanisms. So agency costs are the sum of the incentives, the monitoring costs, the enforcement costs, and individual financial losses incurred by principals because governance mechanisms cannot guarantee total compliance by the agent. If you wanted to make sure that your agent did everything exactly the way you wanted, you could put a chair in their office and you could sit there and watch everything they did. But obviously that's not a very good idea. That would take too much of your time. It would be too expensive to do. We have to find other ways of doing this. The effects of governance mechanisms are influenced by how weak or strong they are. If strong governance mechanisms are used, such as a board of directors controlling managerial autonomy, the firm's strategy should better reflect stakeholders' interests. In recent years, corporate governance mechanisms have received greater scrutiny due to the passing of various legislation that requires agents and boards of directors to do certain things. For example, CEOs and certain top-level managers and directors have to sign financial statements that are released to the public. This puts a greater level of responsibility on them and is intended to raise their level of scrutiny in making sure that the work that they do is done accurately and ethically. So T-Bird Donuts is growing. It's doing really well. And you want to raise some funds to pursue this growth. So it's time to go public. So you select a board of 5 independent directors and you sell 30% of your stock. You keep 70% of the stock for yourself. And in order to make sure that your directors are willing to work and willing to put in some time to oversee your CEO, you compensate them by granting each a few shares of stock. So let's move on here to ownership concentration. And this is one of the mechanisms that we use. So large block shareholders have a strong incentive to monitor management closely because they own a large portion of stock. This makes it worth their while to spend time, effort, and expense to monitor closely. You own 70% of T-Bird Donuts, so it's worth your time to make sure that you do oversee some of what's happening. Large block shareholders may also obtain board seats, which enhances their ability to monitor effectively. You essentially chose, because you own 70% of the voting, you could pretty much choose the 5 shareholders that are on your board of directors. Financial institutions are legally forbidden from directly holding board seats. Institutional owners are financial institutions such as mutual funds and pension funds that may control large block shareholder positions. There are a number of large group or institutional owners that have an increasing level of influence in companies. And these are a powerful influence in corporate America, and they can significantly influence a firm's choice of strategies and strategic decisions. Just as a quick example of this, there are some institutional investors that buy and sell positions in companies very quickly. We call these transient institutional investors, and they are primarily looking for firms to make shorter term decisions to generate a quick increase in stock price so that they can grow their investments. Dedicated institutional owners, on the other hand, might be something more like a pension fund that buys a stock and holds it for decades, looking for long-term growth. And they would prefer a different type of decision or a different focus to be held by those agents that are running these companies. So shareholder activism is when shareholders convene to discuss a corporation's direction And if they agree on what should happen, shareholders can vote as a block to elect their own candidates to the board. This can lead to proxy fights, and there are limits on shareholder activism available to institutional owners in responding to activist tactics. Sometimes when enough shareholders disagree with what is going on with a company, they can make their voice heard and start to influence what is happening. So question number 2 for you, I want to ask, how might owning stock in your company, in T-Bird Donuts, influence your director's behavior and effort in overseeing CEO behavior?